Thank you for joining the second series of this workshops entitled Enabling Compliance and Monitoring in an Enterprise Cloud Environment. My name is Isaiah Salinas. I'm a Senior Specialist Solution Architect for the Cloud Management Services here in AWS. To go over briefly what we're going to be talking about in today's workshop, we're going to first talk about challenges that customers face when enabling compliance and monitoring. We're going to look at what are the three lines of defense. Also, we're going to see how AWS services you can use to enable compliance. And then we're going to conclude with a demo on how we can utilize AWS Config, AWS Cloud Trail to enable compliance and monitoring within our AWS environment. First, one of the challenges that customers face is they have a wide variety of AWS services to use to enable compliance for their AWS environment. So they tend to ask the question, which one do I use for compliance? Which is the best fit? Or how do you build a compliance solution using these services? Well, to help customers identify which AWS services to use when enabling compliance and monitoring, we want to look at what the Institute of Internal Audit provides as far as a guidance, which is the three lines of defense. As per this model, the business unit, the frontline functions, implementers, own and manage risk and compliance. This is called our first line of defense. The second line are the control functions that set the guardrails and controls and oversee that risk and compliance are being effectively managed. Finally, the third line are the functions that provide independent assurance as to the effectiveness of the risk management and compliance. We have mapped the AWS suite to the three lines of defense models as a quick reference of the service capability fit with some overlap. The three use cases that we'll drill down more in the following slides have been mapped to the three line of defense model. For example, under the management risks, we see AWS Config, AWS Cloud Trail, AWS Systems Manager, AWS Control Tower, and AWS License Manager. This helps customers to implement operational controls for their cloud resources. In the second line, oversee risks, we have AWS Security Hub, Amazon CloudWatch. This helps customers to gain a comprehensive overview of operational health and security posture across their AWS accounts. And lastly, we have assurance of risk and management. We have AWS Audit Manager. This helps customers to assess their controls for security, change management, software licensing, and business continuity. Let's talk a little bit about AWS Config and how it could help in the first line of defense, which is manage risk. At the core of these set of services that can help you enable compliance and monitoring is our key detective control platform, AWS Config. Well, what is AWS Config? AWS Config is a service that enables you to assess, audit, and evaluate the configuration of your AWS resources automatically. AWS Config allows you to automate the evaluation of recorded configuration against desired configurations using a feature called AWS Config Rules. Let's say you want to make sure all buckets created are encrypted. You can deploy a managed config rule that automatically evaluates that right at the moment the resources created are modified. We provide a rich set of rules that evaluate some of the most common scenarios. Those are called managed rules because these are created by AWS. However, we have another type of AWS config rule, which are custom rules that you can leverage to create your own custom evaluation of your resources to make sure they're at a specific compliance state. Another service that helps with our enabling of compliance and monitoring within our AWS environment is AWS System Manager. It's the operation hub for AWS resources. It allows you to group resources in a way that is meaningful for your operation teams. It then provides you rich visualization that helps simplify operation. Lastly, it allows you to take action on those resources by providing tool to automate workflow and EC2 instance management. But it also plays an important role in enabling compliance and monitoring within AWS. How, you might ask? Well, AWS Systems Manager automation allows you to create automation workflow to manage AWS resources. You can design remediation actions to fix non-compliant resources detected by AWS Config. Automation provides a simple to use console experience to create automation workflows. You can also use our DSL to write your own Python or PowerShell scripts to run as well. Another service that helps us to enable compliance and monitoring within our AWS account is AWS Cloud Trail. It's a service that enables governance, compliance, operational auditing, and risk auditing of your AWS account. With AWS Cloud Trail, you can log, continuously monitor, and retain account activity related to actions across your AWS infrastructure. AWS Cloud Trail provides event history of your AWS account activity, including actions taken through the AWS Management Console, AWS SDKs, command line tools, and other AWS services. You can enable one trail on each region for all management events automatically at no charge. That just shows how important this service is for us. Additionally, you can enable data events, which allow you to track API changes that happen at the resource level. For an example, say you want to know when a specific file was created in an S3 bucket, or when a file was deleted within an S3 bucket. These data events provide you this additional information within AWS Cloud Trail to give you that extra compliance and auditing of your accounts. We're now going to move over to a demo to go over how we can enable AWS Cloud Trail and AWS Config, and how we can use that when enabling compliance and monitoring within our accounts. We're first going to start off by deploying the CloudFormation template that was provided for you within the workshop. So we're going to go into CloudFormation. And what this template's going to do, it's going to apply some prerequisites that we'll need when creating the various resources that we're going to use with AWS Config. So once you downloaded your template, we're going to go ahead and upload the template, choose the template file, our workshop config prerequisites. We'll go ahead and open that. Click Next. We're going to give the template a name, and we're going to call it Workshop Config Prerequisites. We'll then click Next. We'll scroll to the bottom, keep all the defaults, and keep Next. We'll scroll to the bottom again, and we'll select the checkbox that you acknowledge that AWS CloudFormation might create IAM resource with custom names. Last, we'll go ahead and click Create Stack. This will start creating the resources needed for our workshop as we go in, create additional, we utilize AWS Config and utilize AWS Cloud Trail when enabling our compliance and monitoring. As that CloudFormation stack is running, we'll now go ahead and go over to AWS Cloud Trail and enable Cloud Trail. So within AWS Cloud Trail, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a trail for CloudTrail. So we'll click on Trails and we'll click Create Trail. And in here, we're going to give it a name for our trail. We'll call this Workshop Week. We're then going to leave the Create New Bucket set there, and it's going to basically create a S3 bucket based on our accounts and a GUID. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is also enable KMS encryption. Now, this is very important because this allows you to encrypt your files, your CloudTrail event files that get delivered to your S3 bucket when so it encrypts them at rest there. The other thing we want to do is we want to basically enable that and also set up a KMS key that we'll use for encrypting our files. So we'll leave it at new, and then we'll type in a KMS alias. For this, we'll call it CloudTrail Workshop KMS. We'll also want to have enabled log file validation. What this setting is going to do, it's basically going to validate that nothing has happened to that file from the moment it left the CloudTrail backplane and being delivered to the S3 bucket. It validates the integrity of that file to make sure that nothing was changed. The next option we want to go ahead and enable is also CloudWatch logs. By enabling this option, additionally, it's not only going to deliver these CloudTrail events being delivered to your S3 bucket, but it's also going to enable these can also be delivered to a CloudWatch log group, which later in the workshop, we'll then see how we can actually utilize CloudWatch log groups to query the information captured by CloudTrail. So within this area, we want to define a new log group. For the log group name, we're going to change it, and it's going to be we're going to call it CloudTrail/default log group. We also want to define an IAM role that's going to basically give CloudTrail access to CloudWatch log groups. So for this role, we're going to call it CloudTrail role for CloudWatch logs. We'll leave the rest default and we'll click next. Next, we then have to select what type of events we're going to capture within our CloudTrail trail. We're going to utilize and leave check management events. This is basically capturing all operational events that occur within our accounts. We have additionally the option to utilize data events. These are optional. They do incur an additional charge, but the data events do allow you to capture operations at the resource level, such as put objects within an S3 bucket, or when you need to also monitor data events when it comes to Lambda functions or DynamoDB. You can enable data events to capture these additional API calls that are made within AWS. Inside events are another event that can be captured by CloudTrail. Inside events are AWS CloudTrail's anomaly detection. So what inside events will allow you to do is they'll basically detect any anomalies that occur within your AWS account and report those back to you as an inside event. We'll later talk about a little bit more about inside events and how you can use them. So we'll leave the default as read and write for management events, but we'll exclude KMS events. And we'll go ahead and click next. It'll verify all our options here, and we'll go ahead and click Create Trail. Alrighty, our trail is now created. So let's go take a look back at our CloudFormation template to make sure it finished successfully. So go to CloudFormation. As we can see, it completes our prerequisites. So the next thing we want to do is now we want to enable AWS Config. So let's go to Config. So when we enable a config, we have to enable the AWS Config recorder. So the AWS Config recorder, to enable that, we'll go ahead and click on Get Started. And within the Get Started, we'll have the config recorder settings defined for us here. And so if we look at it, under our general settings, we have two options. We could record all resources supported in this region or record specific resources. We want to choose record all resources supported in this region. It's going to give our greater flexibility as far as what resources AWS Config will track and record for us. The other option we have here is include global resources. This is something we want to go ahead and check, but keep in mind, AWS Config is a regional service. And so when enabling config, we want to enable it in each region where we would like to track changes within our resources. However, the global resources such as IAM, you only want to enable this in one region where you have AWS Config enabled within your accounts. The next option is we want to go ahead and use the AWS Config service link role. This automatically provides config the needed IAM policy rights in order to go and record those changes within your AWS resources. You do have the option to go ahead and define your own IAM role from your accounts and apply the specific IAM policy that is outlined within our documentation that AWS Config will need. So for this exercise, we'll leave it as create AWS Config service link role. We'll then want to define a delivery method. And we have the option of either creating a new S3 bucket, choose a bucket from another bucket from your account, or choose a bucket from another account. For this lab, we're going to go ahead and leave the default and say create a bucket, and the bucket name is already defined for us. Additionally, if you had multiple accounts where you had AWS Config running, a good best practice would also be to choose a bucket from another account. Basically, this would be an account where you have a centralized login in place where you can then deliver the configuration items all to one central location of an S3 bucket. So we'll leave create a bucket as the default with our bucket name there. We won't check SNS topic, but additionally, you can set up SNS to be notified when specific events occur within AWS Config when recording configuration items. We'll go ahead and click Next. In this next section, it wants us to define what rules do we want to apply when we enable AWS Config. For right now, we're going to go ahead and leave this blank, and we'll go ahead and click Next. It'll ask us to review the changes, and then we'll go ahead and click Confirm. At this point, it's creating the S3 bucket, the service link role, and getting the AWS Config recorder set up to start tracking and recording resources within our accounts. So now that AWS Config is enabled and recording our resource changes, we now want to take a look at how we can now apply AWS Config roles to our account to now track specific states of our resources to make sure that they're in a compliant state that we define that meets our compliance configuration for our environment. To do this, we go to AWS Config Rules, and we'll click Add Role. So AWS Config provides two different types of roles. We have AWS Managed roles, and we also have custom roles. Currently with AWS Managed roles, these are roles provided and managed by AWS. We currently have about 171 roles, all variety of different use cases that you can utilize these roles to evaluate the configuration state of your resource. For an example, let's say you have S3 buckets that you don't want to be publicly accessible. You can go ahead and look for S3, and you see that we have specific S3 rules that say S3 account level block access S3 account level public access blocks. You also have additional other rules that say S3 bucket level public access prohibited. These two rules will then check if public access is prohibited at the account level or at the bucket level. Some other managed rules that will help us with our operational areas is when it comes to volumes. Let's look at some rules around volumes. Another rule that can help us manage our EC2 EBS volumes is EC2 volume in use check. This manage rule allows us to check whether an EBS volumes are currently attached to an EC2 instance. This helps us with operational state compliance to verify that our EBS volumes are currently being used. And it helps us to track down EBS volumes that are not currently attached to an instance and marks them in a non-compliant state. Then we can then go ahead and take any type of action that we need to do with those EBS volumes, perhaps create a snapshot and then store them away and remove the EBS volume. This is just another example how AWS Config can help us gain operational insights into our compliance state within our AWS environment. Now, within this lab, we're going to go ahead and take a look at another AWS managed role that's called EC2 Instance Managed by Systems Manager. What this role will allow us to do, it allows us to check whether an Amazon EC2 instance running in our account are currently being managed by AWS Systems Manager. If it is not currently managed, then it will mark the instance as non-compliant. For this lab, we're going to go ahead and set up this role and verify whether our EC2 instances are currently being managed by SSM. So we'll go ahead and select the role and click Next. And then comes to the area where we now have to define some configurations for this manage role. Within the manage role, one thing I want to highlight is the trigger type. Every role has a different trigger type. It could either be configuration changes or it could be periodic changes. When it's set to be a configuration change, this role evaluation will only occur when the determined scope of changes is set. So in this particular rule, it's setting for resource changes of EC2 instances and SSM managed instance inventory. Whenever those resources, it detects a change in those resources, AWS Config rule will invoke an evaluation of this rule to make sure that that specific resource that the recorder captured is still being defined by the compliance state that this rule is checking. So we'll go ahead and then click Next, and then we'll add role. So now our AWS Config manage role is now set within our accounts. This is now going to go and check the evaluation of our EC2 instances and making sure if they are currently being managed by SSM. If it's not, it then will return that resource as a non-compliant state. So in the next exercise, we're going to go ahead and define an EC2 instance. So we're going to go over to our EC2 instance console. And we're going to deploy an EC2 instance. So we'll go ahead and click on Launch Instance. And we're going to use Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And we're going to choose a T3 small. We'll choose Next. In this setting, we're going to leave everything default. We don't want to define an IAM role because we want to show you how the config role that we set up will then notify or mark this EC2 resource as non-compliant, not being managed by SSM. So we'll go ahead and click on Next to add storage. We'll leave it default. We'll click Next to add tags. We'll leave that as default. And then next, we'll define a security group. Here we're going to go ahead and create our security group. So we'll go ahead and choose the option where it says select and create a new security group. We'll go give it the name of Workshop Security Group, and also the description, we'll give it the same name. We'll go ahead and remove this public access rule of SSH and click Review and Launch. We'll go ahead and then launch the instance. We'll select the option to proceed without a key pair and check the box that we acknowledge, and we'll say Launch Instance. Now our instance is going to be deployed and start being provisioned within our account. So we see here that our EC2 instance is now provisioned within our account. So we're going to go back over to AWS Config. So let's go ahead and click on Rules. And if you notice, our rule that we set up for EC2 instances managed by Systems Manager, we now see that there's one non-compliant resource. So let's go ahead and check on that. So we'll click on that rule. We'll see the EC2 instance in a non-compliant state. We can go ahead and look at that resource. It then provides us additional information here as far as what this resource is. Also something with AWS Config that helps us track these changes is what we have called a resource timeline. If we click on a resource timeline, what this is going to do, it's going to capture configuration changes, compliance changes, and also Cloud Trail changes. If you notice here, we have a configuration change. This is going to be set up because AWS Config recorded a new resource that was created. So it automatically will create a configuration change event here. But if you click on View Full Record, it will also show us any relationships this security group, this EC2 instance has with other resources. For example, our EC2 instance is tied to an Elastic network interface, an ENI. It's attached to a security group. It's attached to a subnet, which is attached to a VPC that also has an EBS volume attached to the instance. So this is a nice way to see what resources have relationships to other resources. So we'll go back to our rule. And let's look at our EC2 instance managed by Systems Manager rule. Now, what happens is now that we have this compliance check within our environment, checking for instances that are not currently being managed by AWS SSM, how can we then remediate that? How can we put our resource from a non-compliant state to a compliant state? This is where we're going to make use of remediation actions. Remediation actions allow us to apply an SSM automation document that will go and put our resource back to our desired configuration state. So to do this, we'll go up in the top and we'll choose Actions and we'll say Manage Remediation. This allows us then to define the type of remediation action we want to take whenever a resource is marked non-compliant. We have the option to do an automatic remediation, which will trigger the remediation automatically when a resource is in a non-compliant state. But you also have the option to choose a manual remediation. This is the one we're going to go ahead and select. The next item here has remediation actions details. This is where we're going to actually choose our remediation action. As I mentioned, it's utilizing SSM automation documents to allow us to do this remediation. So within this list, we're provided all the AWS managed SSM automation documents that are provided for us. One of these that we're going to use is called AWS Attach IAM to Instance. We're going to go ahead and select that. And then we're going to go in under the resource ID parameters. We're going to go ahead and select and choose Instant ID. So what that's going to do, it's going to pass the resource ID, which is the resource that had that configuration change, and it's going to pass it to a parameter within our automation document that's defining the instance ID. The next option is we need to define the role that it's going to attach to the instance. So we're going to go ahead and apply in here the IAM role that was already deployed via that CloudFormation stack that we initially deployed when we started the workshop. So we're going to go ahead and paste the name of the role here, which is called Workshop EC2 SSM role. And then we'll go ahead and click Save Changes. So now that we go back to our rule, you can see that now it has a remediation action attached to the specific role that we set up. Since we set it as manual, we can go ahead and then select the instance and choose remediate. What this is going to do, it's now going to launch that automation document, and it's going to run it against the EC2 instance that was in a non-compliant state. It's going to go and now then attach that IAM role to our EC2 instance. So as you can see, our action was executed successfully. So now let's go look at our instance to make sure that the EC2 instance now has that role attached. So click on the instance, select the instance, and look at security. And as you see here, our IAM role was attached to the instance. So our remediation action did what it was supposed to do. Now it puts this EC2 instance into a compliant state to where it's now being managed by SSM Manager. And a way we can check that is that we're actually going to go ahead and reboot this instance. This allows us, by rebooting it, a quick way for the SSM agent running on the instance to report back to SSM, making sure that it's online and being managed by SSM. So we rebooted the instance, and let's go over to SSM. And we'll go over to Fleet Manager. We see our instance and it's online. So now we go over to Config. And we'll look at our rule. Our rule is now in a compliant state. So this gives us an example how we could utilize AWS Config manage rules to check for a specific desired configuration state for our resources to have them in a specific compliance for our environment. We can make use of these AWS manage config rules to basically apply and enable compliance within our AWS environment. The next area we want to talk about is Conformance Packs. Now, what Conformance Packs allow you to do is allows you to group these AWS config roles within a Conformance Packs, which are a group of AWS config roles that are immutable. By this meaning that you can deploy these Conformance Packs within your account, and these specific config roles cannot be changed by somebody else within the AWS config roles. The only way you can make these changes is by doing an update or new deployment of your Conformance Pack. Let's take a look on some of the Conformance Packs. So we'll click on Deploy Conformance Pack and briefly go over some of the sample templates that are provided for us. So we look at the drop-down list of the sample templates provided by AWS Config Conformance Packs. We have a list of a variety of operational best practices around IAM, Amazon S3, also specific compliance frameworks such as CIS, NIST, PCI, HIPAA, and so forth. These Conformance Pack sample templates are provided as a starting base that can help you meeting your operational compliance frameworks or specific frameworks that you want to also adhere to when enabling your compliance within an account. Down below, it provides you a link to our documentation where it can then outline what each of these conformance packs are checking. So in our example here, we're going to deploy the S3 operational best practice frameworks for S3 buckets. Within your lab, you had a link to go ahead and download a conformance pack that also has remediation actions applied to it. So just to remember, when you download this template, you want to make sure to go and replace the account ID that's outlining the instructions with your current account ID that you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Upload Template and choose Upload Template File. I'm going to select the operational best practice for Amazon S3 with remediation. This is what you've downloaded from the labs. And we'll go ahead and click Open. We'll then click Next. We're going to give it a name. And we're going to call this. So we're going to give it a name and we'll call Operational Best Practice for Amazon S3 with remediation. Then we're going to select Add Parameter. So within here, we want to go ahead and add a specific parameter called S3 target bucket name for enable logging. Now the value we're going to have to capture from our CloudFormation that we recently deployed. So we'll go in here and we'll do CloudFormation. I'm going to open this up in a new tab. And we're going to look at our template here and look at the resources that are deployed. And we're looking for the S3 logging bucket. So we'll grab this bucket name that was provisioned. And we'll go ahead and paste that into the value here. And we'll click Next. It's asking us to go ahead and review our conformance pack changes. And we'll go ahead and click Deploy Conformance Pack. Our conformance pack then gets deployed with an AWS Config, and then it's basically going to outline what specific rules this conformance pack is checking. So we'll give it a moment to deploy. All right, our conformance pack was deployed successfully. It shows completed. So we click on our conformance pack here. We'll see in here that it has a lot of rules related to S3 buckets. It's checking if public read is prohibited, if logging is enabled, server-side encryption is enabled, and also SSL request only is enabled for the S3 bucket, and also public write is prohibited also as well. But these conformance packs also has remediation actions, automatic remediation actions tied to it. So the moment we create an S3 bucket that currently doesn't have any of these options set, it's automatically going to remediate the resource to be in a compliance state. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we'll go into our S3. And we'll go ahead and create a new bucket. And we'll give it a bucket name. And you want to make a bucket name that is unique to you. So we'll call this Workshop Bucket. And then I'm just going to give it a random number here to make it unique. I'll leave all the defaults, block all public access, and everything else I'll leave defaults. So as you see here, encryption is going to be disabled. That's one of the options the conformance pack is checking to make sure encryption is enabled. So when I create this bucket, that conformance pack, one of the rules within there should automatically detect that resource in a non-compliant state and automatically put it into compliance with the remediation actions. So let's go back to AWS Config. So let's go ahead and look at this. So we'll go into our conformance packs. And we'll look at our conformance pack that we deployed, workshop operational S3 best practice with remediation. And we'll see how it's currently remediated the new S3 bucket we just recently created. So I'll go ahead and click on workshop operational S3 best practice. And then down below, we'll have all the config rules that were bundled within this conformance pack that we deployed. And the one we're going to look at is S3 bucket server-side encryption enabled. So remember, when we created that S3 bucket, we didn't have checked enable encryption. So the rule should have automatically ran that auto remediation action here called AWS enable S3 bucket encryption to put that specific S3 bucket into a compliance state, having server-side encryption enabled. So we'll go ahead and click on this rule. And we'll go down below. We currently have no S3 buckets in a non-compliant state, but let's go ahead and take a look at the ones that are in compliant and verify our new S3 bucket is now compliant. If we look down below, we see our workshop bucket that we created, and the remediation action was successful, putting this bucket, this S3 bucket resource into a compliant state outlined within our conformance pack for S3 operational best practices. So that just gives an example how we can utilize conformance packs with remediations. So in this exercise, we were able to see how we can utilize AWS Config to enable compliance and monitoring, to utilize config rules to basically check for desired configuration state within our environment. If a resource was marked as non-compliant, we were able to then apply remediation actions to put those resources back into a compliant state. Now let's take a look at AWS Cloud Trail and how we can use AWS Cloud Trail to monitor our compliance information. So as mentioned, AWS Cloud Trail is our services that is able to audit the activity being occurred within our accounts. It monitors specific API events, but can also monitor user console access, or console deny access when users try to log into the console and have a failure. AWS Cloud Trail provides an event history that allows us to view events that were captured by CloudTrail for the past 90 days. So within here, you can then go in to the event trail and search for specific events or specific event types or attributes that are defined here to try to determine what was actually captured. However, in the initial workshop, we went ahead and enabled AWS CloudTrail. But if you remembered, we also enabled it to offload or deliver these events that are captured by AWS CloudTrail to CloudWatch log groups. That's what we're going to go ahead and take a look on, how we can actually utilize CloudWatch log groups to get some of this data that's being captured by CloudTrail. So let's go to CloudWatch. And in CloudWatch, we're going to go ahead and click on Dashboards. And we're going to create a dashboard. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Workshop Dashboard. We'll create the dashboard. We're going to go ahead and select a log table. This is going to take us to CloudWatch Logs Insights. And so in here, we want to go ahead and select the CloudTrail default log group that was previously created when we enabled CloudTrail. And now what this allows us to do is we can utilize CloudWatch Logs Log Insight, which is an area where we can use SQL queries to go ahead and query the data being captured by CloudTrail. So if we want to query for specific event names, such as show me all the start instance event names, or delete functions, or create bucket or any other event name that we want to query within our AWS Cloud Trail, we can actually create a SQL query to grab that information for us and report it. And then additionally, what we just did here is basically going to add it to a dashboard. So let's go ahead and put in here a query that will show us any events related to the EC2 instance. So in here, we're creating a query that's filtering based on the event source of EC2 and basically showing us a count of these specific events. So I'll go ahead and choose Run Query. You can see here, it provided our results here, showing us the specific events that were captured related to EC2. So this can be very helpful when trying to monitor specific compliance state information, such as who did what and how they did it. And so it'll provide us that additional inside information that CloudTrail captures by this API activity that CloudTrail is gathering. So by utilizing CloudWatch log insights, you can then query that information. Additionally, on the right, you have this option where it says queries, and you have some additional sample queries that you can make use of too as well that will give you an example of other information that you can capture within CloudTrail utilizing CloudWatch log group insights. Click Create Widget there. As you can see here, we have our dashboard that was created. So now we're going to go ahead and clean up these resources. And we're going to go ahead and first delete the dashboard. And then now we're going to go to EC2. And we're going to terminate that instance that we provisioned during our workshop. So let's select that instance. And we'll choose Actions. Instance State, and then Terminate Instance. We'll hit Terminate. Next, we're going to go to our security groups. And we're going to delete that security group that we created for our instance. Next, we're going to go to AWS Config. And we're now going to remove the conformance pack that we recently deployed. So we'll select the conformance pack, Actions, Delete, and type in Delete. Start deleting the conformance pack. Next, we'll go to our rules, and we are going to delete the manage rule of EC2 instance managed by Systems Manager. So we'll go ahead and delete the remediation action associated to this rule. So we'll click on the rule itself. And for the remediation action, we'll go ahead and click delete and hit delete. And now we'll click on actions and delete rule. And we'll choose delete. The rule, it will now then be in a queue to get deleted. So the next thing we want to do is now let's go ahead and disable AWS Config Recorder. So we'll go to Settings and click Edit. and unchecked enable recording. This will then stop the AWS Config recorder from now creating new configuration items for resources that are provisioned within our account. Additionally, to delete the recorder, we'll also delete the recorder via the CLI. For this, we'll open up Cloud Shell. And we'll go ahead and click close here. Cloud Shell will begin to create our environment. All right. Once our terminal is ready, then we're going to go ahead and paste the command outlined in your lab, which will basically delete the default recorder that gets set up when we set up initially AWS Config. Go ahead and hit enter. Default recorder has been deleted. We can then verify this by going over to config. And now it's back as wanting to be enabled again. So the next resource we want to go ahead and clean up was the CloudFormation stack that we initially deployed at the start of this demo. So go to CloudFormation, select the stack, and click delete. And click delete stack. This will begin the process of deleting the resources that were created with this CloudFormation stack. The next item we want to go ahead and delete is we'll go to CloudTrail. And we'll go to Trails. We'll select the trail that we created called Workshop Week and click delete. And then we'll hit delete again. This deletes the trail. And we should now have all the resources that we provisioned within our demo now deleted and no longer in use within our AWS accounts. So that concludes our demo, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for attending today's workshop where we saw how we can enable compliance and monitoring within our enterprise within AWS. We got to see how we can make use of AWS Config and enable that within our accounts, how we're able to use AWS Config rules to search for a specific desired configuration state utilizing a config rule. And then when it's in a non-compliant, take those remediation actions utilizing SSM automation documents to put back into a desired configuration state those resources. We also got to take a look on how we can utilize Conformance Packs to deploy our S3 operational best practices to keep our S3 buckets into a specific desired compliance state as well, and took a look at AWS Cloud Trail and how we can utilize that to monitor and audit our AWS API activity, and how we can utilize CloudWatch log insights to query this data that's being captured by AWS Cloud Trail. We hope everybody enjoyed the workshop for today, and definitely please let me know if you have any additional questions. But thank you for coming.